Welcome to today's show. I am your host, Eric Darnley Small. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of What You Missed. And a lot going on this week. I'm going to get into it. Today is a little bit of a quieter day. Today is a Friday, and it's quieter because the markets are closed today. But there's a lot going on outside the markets and in the markets that I want to just touch on today. If you like, of course, what I do here, and if you want to see more of videos like this, you can like and subscribe and click the bell to be notified of new content as it is uploaded. In addition, I'm going to talk a lot about what I see in the news, what I think is important. And you can mastodon me at mastodon.vtip.me/@ what you missed, which is the Mastodon site for this show, this channel. Mastodon, for those who might not be aware, is a Twitter clone. It's open source, though, so it's not owned by any oligarchs, any Zuckerbergs and Musks of the world. So there is no fear that in the future, if you build an audience, if you have people come to the site and people like reaching out to it, that through it, that they're not going to turn around and sell it to the next billionaire, as what happened with Musk and Twitter, which is now X, was sold by the guy who created Blue Sky, which is one of the reasons why I'm not on Blue Sky. So anyway, Mastodon is also really important. I'm going to refer back to that because it is constantly being updated with new content that is important. So even when I don't have shows, if you can go to the Mastodon, you can see what is important, and you can reach out to the show and to me to talk about that. Just a quick look at the markets. Again, it's closed because this is Easter week, Good Friday today. The market was a mess, and Donald Trump is to blame. And what's interesting here is that normally what you would want to do if you're a Republican taking over from an unpopular Democrat, particularly if the economy is not doing well, which in my lifetime that has never really happened. Usually Republicans get a strong economy from a Democrat since Bill Clinton. I think Jimmy Carter was the last time you had a Republican get a bad economy from a Democrat. So there is a myth out there that Republicans are better in business. That myth is being destroyed thanks to Donald Trump, the gift of Trump, which I like to call it. But the Trump administration has embraced full-throated tariffs. And the polling is becoming more and more clear that the American people are not idiots about tariffs. And they may have been prior to the election, but now they are not. And the polling that has been going throughout, and you can see it if you've been looking at the Mastodon, has shown that Americans are not happy at all with Donald Trump and his handling of the whole tariff situation and of the economy. Americans are scared. The VIX, which I usually would talk about if the market was open, was in the green partially, but also in the green, which is bad. When the market's in the green, that's good. When the VIX is in the green, that's bad. Anything 40, I think, or above gets you in the green, and 40 is when people begin to panic. At one point, I think a few weeks ago, it was at 60. So highest numbers of volatility, fear index is what the VIX is called because of volatility. People are selling. The bond market, as I did a video of before, we're seeing unbelievable stuff. And I pointed to that in the previous video about what Paul Krugman had said and others, which is basically that the selling off of bonds and stocks at the same times indicate more than just a recession. It indicates a lack of confidence in America as a stable country to park your money. It is unheard of. Usually people will sell stocks and move to bonds. But when you have a sell-off of both, it means people are exiting the U.S. market, and it's all Donald Trump. And it is affecting his poll numbers. My only quibble is that the Democrats are not doing enough to paint this with the Republican Party writ large, to hit the Republican Party with this, not just Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a player in all of this, but I don't believe that the connection has been made, and this is a fault of the Democrats, that Donald Trump cannot do what he's doing without them being a part of it, without them helping him. And matter of fact, he couldn't do it at all. This is collusion. The Republican Party, the conservative movement, and Donald Trump are in collusion or colluding with one another to destroy the economy and people's livelihoods. And unfortunately, the Democratic Party has not made that case, and it is a bad thing. However, people are starting to get wind on the right of how bad things are, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But what's also beginning to become fascinating is Donald Trump's rhetoric on this. He is a guy who will never admit to being wrong. However, China has played this beautifully, because China has decided that it has hit a wall as to how much it's going to increase its tariffs, putting out a statement basically saying this is ridiculous. We're going to increase our tariffs X amount, I think 120%, but no more. And we're not playing Donald Trump's game, basically. And while we have 250% tariffs, they have 150 or something like that. But at a certain point in time, the numbers don't mean anything. It is a ridiculous game, and they've decided they're not playing their game. Instead, what they've decided is to strategically hit America in very specific places, specific imports into China, exports from the U.S., like soybeans. They have hit soybean imports with huge tariffs, which hit farmers in red states. So they're acting surgically while Donald Trump is acting irrationally. And a quote from Donald Trump, which was very interesting. You could see it on Mastodon. I'll see if I can pull it up. But he has decided he's not going to continue with the tariffs, on increasing tariffs on China, because it's not working. He's begging Xi, the emperor, or not emperor, but basically the head, the prime minister of China, the president of China, to come and meet with him, begging him, even though he's saying, I don't have to meet with him, they need to meet with us. Yet when you read his statements, he's begging them to come. And I'm sure behind the scenes, he's probably reaching out to Xi and his people and begging him to come. But because the man is so prideful, he can't bring himself to say that he wants it. But this is a very interesting story. The Trump administration announced fees on Chinese shipping docking at U.S. ports. So Trump is trying to use and do what Xi is doing, which is look at other areas where he can apply pressure other than tariffs. Remember, the tariffs were a key thing to Donald Trump's entire run. He was going to cut deficits. He was going to be able to spend. He was going to be able to cut taxes, all because of billions of dollars that they were supposed to be getting in taxes. As I indicated on the Mastodon before, there's a report that these ports don't have the technology to bring in these tariffs. And so they've been allowing imports to come in without tariffing, without hitting them with the additional tariff, because they can't collect it. The system has not been built, and this is something that Paul Krugman has talked about. There is no system that has been built out of whole cloth that can be risen up in weeks to deal with all of these tariffs that are coming in. They don't have a way to do this. It would take months. So Donald Trump, meanwhile, is going around saying we're making all of this money. Meanwhile, there's no evidence of it. So he's trying other ways to get money. Steep levies on Chinese-made ships arriving at U.S. ports have been proposed, up as much as $1.5 million as part of a plan to bring in more shipping manufacturing back to the U.S., a policy which has bipartisan support. So Donald Trump is looking to do everything that he can outside of tariffs, because tariffs aren't working. They're not coming to the table. He has hit NVIDIA with $5.5 or so billion if they decide to try to export their a license, if they try to export their chips to China, which is, of course, beginning to hurt their bottom line and brought down the NASDAQ, singularly brought down the NASDAQ yesterday and the day before. Google hit with the antitrust action. And more rich Americans are opening up Swiss bank accounts, fearing U.S. risks. Very, very, very interesting, not good, regarding where U.S. People are looking to park their money outside of the U.S. Again, this has to do with the bonds. If we can't get money, we can't we can't, if people are not willing to buy our treasury bonds, then we can't spend. We have to go on a diet, a financial diet. Nintendo Switch 2 retailers pre-orders to begin April 24th following tariff delays. So this was another thing that happened. The tariffs increased the amount of imports, and Nintendo decided that they were going to hold off on the Nintendo Switch here in the U.S. These are the kinds of things that Americans recognize. They may not know what a tariff is, but they recognize when they hear BMW is not going to have their newest Audi come to the U.S. because of tariffs, or the Nintendo Switch doesn't come because of tariffs, or any of the other different things that is going on. And they don't like it. The American people want to buy, and they don't want to be prevented from buying because of these tariffs. So apparently because of this, Donald Trump has had to change his tune on some of these tariffs and has suspended for 90 days tariffs on certain items in certain countries. And that has reversed the decision by Nintendo to bring the Nintendo Switch here. And the gaming system will begin on April 24th at $449. Those are the kinds of things that I was looking at to talk about. U.S. proposes lighter sanctions on Russia as part of a peace plan. This is the big story that I think riled markets and a lot of people. Trump called for Fed to cut rates as Powell termination cannot come fast enough. This is one that I want to talk about today. And also Kilmar Abrego Garcia in El Salvador. Chris Van Hollen was able to finally reach him and speak to him. This, I think, is one of the most important stories going on. And one of the strengths that we have in this time is this story has to remain in the spotlight. People have to, and it has remained in the spotlight. And this is killing Donald Trump. But also what I think is very interesting is it's killing Republicans. It's killing business leaders. Stephanie Ruhle was on a podcast talking about, she speaks to business leaders and they're wondering what the hell is going on. Why can't they bring this guy back? When you have business leaders talking about this kind of stuff, this is making its rounds, and it's hubris. And Donald Trump, he is a man, pride goeth before a fall. And Donald Trump is a man who will absolutely fall because he cannot bring himself to do the right thing and to admit he was wrong. And he's going to have to, because between the tariffs and this story, thank God, the Democrats are doing a good job. The media is staying on this. You also have in the wings Bernie Sanders and AOC going out there speaking to voters all over about, in red states, by the way, not in they were in LA, but they were also in Utah, getting record numbers. And so something is happening here. And Heather Cox Richardson on her Substack today, which you can find links in the Mastodon, has a very interesting write-up, and I'm going to go through it. This wasn't going to be my plan for today. I was going to talk about Argentina. Fascinating things going on there. And Argentina can tell us, I think, a lot about what's happening and what the Trump administration is trying to accomplish. However, that's going to be for another day. Instead, I wanted to talk about Richardson's post today, because she summarizes what's going on and has some very interesting observations. She, by the way, is a very popular, very famous historian, and she used to know the Republican Party left and right, upside down. And she said today it's unrecognizable. But she goes, today, Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, the senator from Maryland, and by the way, brilliant for Chris Van Hollen to do this. And then Democrats took that lead and said, we're going to send a delegation down there, too, to El Salvador regarding this particular issue. So it's almost like a pincer move, because let me just summarize something here. And just in case people don't know what happened, this guy, Garcia, who is an immigrant, is being accused by the president of being MS-13 and Homeland Security. I'm not even going to go into the right and wrong of that. I believe there's a link on the Mastodon that talks about this. I'm not even going to go into it. But the bottom line is that he did not get due process, meaning the government has to prove he is, in fact, a terrorist and not somebody who's legally allowed to be here. So what they did instead, mocking the court, by the way, because the court had an injunction saying, do not deport this man. Donald Trump went ahead and deported it. And the president of El Salvador, the Secretary of State, retweeted the president of El Salvador mocking the judge, basically saying, oopsie, too late. So judges don't like that when you're in violation of a court order. So you've got on one side the legal pressure. Then you've got on this other side the Democrats in the Senate, Chris Van Hollen going down there and making a big stink about this. In the House, they're beginning to send a delegation down there, right, to also make a big stink about this. Republicans have been going down there and taking pictures, thumbs up, you know. Joyanne Reed did an excellent, you can take a look at the Mastodon. I have a link to her Substack where she says it echoes Abu Ghraib, the notorious prison in Iraq during the Iraq War, and pictures that had come out about soldiers, U.S. soldiers, taking photos of themselves posing as people were being tortured. People, you know, if you're too young, you may not recognize that and may not have remembered that, but it was a scandal at the time. And it is what happens when you have the rule of law begins to fall apart and people are just winging it. And this is what America does and is known for doing. Mocking people, deciding to begin to demean them, treat them like animals, treat them in disgusting, dehumanizing ways. So Noam and other Congress people have been going down there taking pictures, thumbs up in front of these guys in jail, like minimizing it and mocking and showing off. So wisely, you've got Democrats who are deciding, well, if they can go down there, we can too. And we can instead focus on this stuff and the injustice of deporting a man against the law. So you've got judges on one side, you've got the Democrats, Congress people on another side. You have apparently social media figures like Joe Rogan is beginning to talk about this as like this is not what I signed up for. So you've got a pressure there as well. Then you've got Bukele, who is the president of El Salvador, who has a CCOP prison, who's in collusion with Trump over this whole thing. And I'm not even going to go to his press meeting when he came here. But this man is not an idiot. And while he's mocking this judge in a tweet that was shared by Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, he must know that this is not a good look for El Salvador and for him. And he must clearly know that one day these Democrats may be in positions of power. And how much do I really want to piss these people off? Because they're taking this issue seriously, whereas the president is dismissing it and his cabinet is dismissing it. And I think he's beginning to think, oh, crap, I may have really made a mistake here by doubling and tripling down on treating this person like, and mocking the rule of law in America. So he has decided that while he was telling the press and he was putting out tweets and saying there's nothing I can do, I can't find this guy, what am I going to do? Someone must have been smart and said, boss, we better do something about this because these folks are serious. And he was able to dig Mr. Garcia out of whatever hole they put him in. And Chris Van Hollen was able to go down there and posted a picture of himself with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man whom the Trump administration said it sent to the notorious CCOT prison in El Salvador through an administrative error, their mistake, but can't get him back, and wrote, I said my goal of this trip was to meet with Kilmar. Tonight I have had that chance. I've called his wife Jennifer to pass along his message of love. I look forward to providing a full update upon my return. while the president of El Salvador, Bukele, apparently tried to stage a photo that would make it look as if the two were enjoying cocktails together, it seems clear that backing down and giving Senator Van Hollen access to Abrego Garcia is a significant shift from Bukele's previous scorn for those trying to address the crisis of a man legally in the U.S. having been sent to a prison in El Salvador without due process. Bukele might be reassessing the distribution of power in the U.S. Here. I think that's exactly what's going on here. Bukele is beginning to think, I may have made a mistake here because things are not going as we had planned. This pressure cooker is all working. And, it begins with Garcia and it continues on with the other Venezuelans and then the other people being snatched up and deported. I'm going to continue on here from, again, Heather Cox Richardson's Substack. The Supreme Court, just to get into, and she sort of summarizes what happened here. But, two different judges, and it's kind of confusing because there were two different judges' orders regarding this. One was regarding don't deport this guy until you've got rights to deport him, and another was talking about the issue of the order and whether Trump has the ability to start deporting any and all migrants, including him. But Judge Innes is one judge, and Judge Innes is dealing with, it's again very complicated to try and keep these two things because there's Judge Boasberg and Judge Innes. Let me start with Boasberg. Boasberg's basic case against Donald Trump was thrown out by the Supreme Court, right? That Donald Trump appealed to the Supreme Court, Judge Boasberg's orders, and the Supreme Court basically said Donald Trump has jurisdiction here. But what Boasberg is doing is questioning whether the Trump administration, prior to the Supreme Court ruling in his favor, if they disobeyed his order, right? Remember, once you have a court order, you can't make a move. It is Boasberg's court order that they disobeyed, even though they later on, the Supreme Court sided with the administration, with the White House. Boasberg is now saying, okay, they sided with the Supreme Court says that Donald Trump could do this. However, who was it that sent him off anyway? You had to wait to get that order before you could send him off. You didn't wait, and somebody decided to go ahead and defy my order. So that's what Boasberg is doing. He is now doing a investigation into who knew what when. And so that's on one side, right? This is almost a retroactive investigation having nothing to do with Garcia, but more to do with the whether the White House defied his order. And they believe there's probable cause. The judge recently said there is probable cause to believe they're in criminal contempt. And you can look at other videos about what that means. Innes, however, she's dealing with another part that the Supreme Court had to handle. And they affirmed her ruling that Garcia needs to be brought back and put on trial to see if the administration, if the White House has evidence that in fact he is a terrorist and can be deported. Right. So those are the two things that are going on. So I'm going to put Boasberg's on the side and focus on Innes because that's where the action is happening right now, because the appeals court, which Donald Trump went to after the Supreme Court, went ahead and affirmed Innes and said that they have to facilitate his return. And now Innes, the Supreme Court says Donald Trump's administration has to facilitate Garcia's return. Went back to the appellate court, not to the appellate court, to the federal court, Judge Innes. And Innes said, I want updates regularly on your facilitating his return. The Trump administration basically said, pound sand, we're not interested in doing that, and decided to go to the appellate court on a narrow reason that the Supreme Court gave with respect to the executive branch. And that's what brings us to this part of Cox Richardson's article, where she talks about today a federal appeals court rejected the Trump administration's attempt to stop Judge Paula Innis' order that it take all available steps to bring Garcia back to the U.S. as soon as possible. Conservative Judge J. Harvey Wilkinson, who was appointed by Ronald Reagan, so this is an old dude, wrote the order. Notably, it began with the compliments to Judge Innis: "We shall not micromanage the efforts of a fine district judge attempting to implement the Supreme Court's recent decision." Then Wilkinson turns his focus on the Trump administration. "It is difficult in some cases to get to the very heart of the matter, but in this case, it is not hard at all. The government is asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order. Further, it claims in essence that because it has rid itself of custody, that there is nothing that can be done. This should be shocking, not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that the Americans far removed from the courthouses hold dear. The government asserts that Abrego Garcia is a terrorist and a member of MS-13. Perhaps, but perhaps not. Regardless, he is still entitled to due process. The court noted that if the government is so sure of its position, then it should be confident in presenting its facts to the court of law." Then Wilkinson writes, "If today the executive claims the right to deport without due process and in disregard of court orders, what assurance will there be tomorrow that it will not deport American citizens and then disclaim responsibility to bring them home? And what assurance shall there be that the executive will not train its broad discretionary powers upon political enemies? The threat, even if not actually, would always be present, and the executive's obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed would lose all meaning." This is again a conservative judge, rock-ribbed as they call it, conservative judge, who is just destroying the Trump administration. So that is another hit. This is the congressional hit. Continuing on Richardson's piece, she goes, 3 days ago on April 14th, Michelle Goldberg of the New York Times wrote that the vibe is shifting against the right. Yesterday, former neocon and fervent Trump critic and editor of The Bulwark, Bill Kristol, posted a photo of plainclothes immigrations and customs enforcement officers kidnapping a Tufts University graduate and commented, "Where does abolish ICE movement go to get its apology?" Wow. Today in the New York Times, conservative David Brooks called for all those resisting what he called a multifaceted assault to make the earth a playground for ruthless men to work together. He called for a comprehensive national civic uprising that would first stop Trump and then create, quote, a long-term vision of a fairer society that is not just hard on Trump, but hard on the causes of Trumpism, one that offers a positive vision. I would call Trumpism conservatism, but he's been a long-time conservative. But, I mean, that is huge. Brooks is hardly the first to suggest that, quote, this is what America reads right now. But a conservative like Brooks, not only arguing that Trump is shackling the greatest institution in American life, but then quoting Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto to call for resistance to those shackles. "We have nothing to lose but our change," signals a shift is underway. Bret Stephens, who I am no fan of, wrote in his column, which Heather Cox Richardson quotes from, "My feelings about not only Trump, but the administration are falling like a boulder down the Mariana Trench. So the memory of things that this administration has done, of which I approve, is drowning in a number of things that are, in my view, reckless, stupid, awful, un-American, hateful, and bad, not just for the country, but also for the conservative movement." Stevens identified J.D. Vance's bullying of Ukraine. "America should never treat an ally that way. certainly not one who is bravely fighting a common enemy. So then she goes into history and talks about in the 1850s, elite Southern enslavers organized to take over the government and create an oligarchy that would make enslavement national. Northerners hadn't been paying a great deal of attention to Southern leaders' slow accumulation of power and were shocked when Congress bowed to them and in 1854 passed a law that overturned the Missouri Compromise that had kept slavery out of the West. The establishment of slavery in the West would mean new slave states that would work with the Southern slave states to outvote the North in Congress, and it would only be a question of time until they made slavery national. Soon the slave power would own the country. Northerners of all parties who disagreed with each other over issues of immigration, finance, and internal improvements, and even over the institution of slavery, came together to stand against the end of American democracy. So there is a shift in the wind. I, of course, believe it's too late. I, of course, believe, and I think, I think that a lot of people are like, where the hell have you been? This is what Kamala Harris was talking about. This is what Joe Biden was talking about. This is what the media was talking about. And these folks have been scammed. The love scam, as I've talked about. They're waking up from the love scam. Is it too late? I don't know. This pressure that is on the administration, not everyone can handle pressure equally. Donald Trump will start throwing people throwing people out of his government and blame them. I'm certain of it, that he has no loyalty to anyone. And those people will then go about writing books or going about talking to reporters and saying, oh, you don't know the half of it, what he's been asking us to do. So they'll begin to turn on each other. When that happens, and how that happens will be an interesting thing. But this is a historic moment in America. This is one of those what they call watershed moments. As Cox Richardson talks about, this is beginning to look very similar to the turning or the shift, the paradigmatic shift that the country had over slavery, as she indicates here, and led to, the Civil War, unfortunately. But hopefully she's thinking that, I don't know that she's echoing. I haven't read the whole thing. Read the whole article. It's in my Mastodon. You can go ahead. Links to the full article are there in the Mastodon. That's mastodon.vtip.me/@what-you-missed. You can read the whole article there. But I believe, and I hope that this means that Republicans in the Congress are not going to be able to hold on to this whole thing. People within the administration are going to start leaking. If he fires Powell and the economy starts taking a tank, that's just another thing that's going to hurt him, Donald Trump and the administration. And things are going to begin to break apart. And we're going to be able to look back at this one man, Garcia, as the Fort Sumter, maybe as the critical point in American history, the detaining of this one man. It's always fascinating to me how one incident that if the other side had just decided to obey the law, just do the right thing, they could have avoided all of this. Because remember, I'd be very fascinated to see where this whole thing goes and what is happening really on the right, because this really does seem like a full-on break or the beginnings of a break in the administration. And the reporting years from now that looks back at this time and what's going on internally, I think it's going to be something. The novel, the book on that is going to be definitely something to read and to look at, because I am very fascinated to see and wondering what in the hell they're thinking right now in the White House and amongst his allies. If he fires J Powell and if he continues defying the court and Garcia, something happens to Garcia in that prison, wow, that is going to be a definite turning point going forward. Thank you for joining me on today's show. You'll see me on the next one. Take care, everyone. Hey there, fantastic viewers. Eric Darnley Small here, and I hope you're loving today's episode of What You Missed. You've reached the end of today's show, but don't worry, there's more show coming up. If you're watching this on YouTube, please click the bell so that you'll be notified when more content is available. You can also help the channel by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. It helps the YouTube algorithm find new viewers so that I can keep bringing you all this incredible content you enjoy. But wait, there are more ways to support the show. You can make a contribution through the show's PayPal, which goes a long way in helping produce even better content for you. And consider becoming a part of our growing community by joining our Mastodon site at mastodon.vtip.me/@whatyoumissed for more engaging discussions and exclusive updates. And here's something you won't want to miss. Mark your calendars for our live show streaming on YouTube and stream.vtip.me Monday mornings, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Your support means the world to me, and together we're making What You Missed the best it can be. Thanks for being a part of my journey.